All right, no, it's not afternoon yet. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second talk, or second panel, essentially, in our series on kind of demystifying the academic job application experience. And today we'll be talking about preparing your job talk. This is a 10,000-foot view because we obviously can't do this in this short amount of time, but we wanted to point to some promising practices. We have some wonderful panelists who are here today, and of course we want to leave ample time for you to ask questions. But first, I would like to briefly introduce my team who is here in the room helping us out. We have Ege Sanel. Ege, you can't see him. Oh, maybe he'll peek around. There's Ege. He is helping with logistics. And we have Alyssa Gardner, who is the one who has been organizing all of this for us. I do not think we have Jess Soria anymore, but we also have, there she is, Jessica Soria. Okay, she's off my screen. So this is the Grad Academy team who has worked really diligently to put all of this on for you. This is also being recorded because we have many students who were unable to attend virtually or in person and really have requested this information. And so it's going to be posted on the website, and we often get a lot of traffic after the fact. So even though it's a nice intimate group in the room here today, I know that this content is going to be really beneficial to our students. I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Alyssa Crittenden. I'm the Vice Provost for Graduate Education, and I'm the Dean of the Graduate College. And it is my pleasure to I will introduce Dr. Helen Wing because she is right to my right, Professor in Life Sciences in the College of Sciences. I will then introduce Dr. Tina Vo, who is also to my right, an Assistant Professor in Teaching and Learning in the College of Education. And last but absolutely not least, Dr. Jennifer Rennels, who is on the screen there, Professor and Psychological Brain Sciences Program Coordinator in the College of Liberal Arts. So we have a lot of experience. That the number of years of institutional knowledge that we have right now is really extraordinary. And I'm so thankful to our panelists for joining us out of just the goodness of their hearts, because I know they're all unbelievably busy. So we are grateful for your time, and I know that the in-person panelists actually brought some things to share. So how we'll start out first is I think it would be a good idea to have all of our panelists introduce themselves very briefly by way of telling us an anecdote. So what we did last time was either tell us the number of search committees that you have been on. You don't have to pick that one. That was the popular one last time. The number of search committees that you have been through. So that was a big one. We had all chairs of departments last time, so that one was really interesting. You can also tell us one of the worst things you've ever seen in a job talk. So kind of a way to start out of what not to do. Or you can tell us an anecdote about either any funny or interesting anecdote about being on a search committee, being part of that process, or being on the job market yourself. Some interesting takeaway for everyone. So just 2 minutes each, and I'm not going to go. So whoever would like to go first.
Oh, I go. So hi, I'm Helen from the School of Life Sciences. So I joined UNLV in 2005. A long time ago now. And so I've seen a lot of applicants come through over the years. I think some of the worst things that I've seen is where the applicant has not prepared or got backup plans for their job talk. They've got it on their laptop, but if the laptop doesn't jive with the infrastructure in the room, then it can't work. And remembering the correct dongle, or whatever they call it, is really important. Have it on a thumb drive. Have some other way to move that talk around so that you can present if worst case scenario. I've seen job talks stored for 20, 30 minutes for that, and it's just unnecessary.
And not a good look.
No.
I'm gonna give 2 because I heard I've got 2 minutes to do this.
Yes.
1, like they're always watching you. Like this whole dongle situation, that is the hidden curriculum of doing these job talks. Making sure that you are poised and polished. So my first one is, one applicant went over by 20, so they had a 20-minute presentation, and then they went 40 minutes total. Ooh. And no one was okay in the room. Like, and these are just like old crotchety professors in the room with us, and I'm just like watching, and I'm like, a really promising candidate that just kept going on. They couldn't meet their time limits, and like we were real bought in, and then it just kept going. And you could see the entire room just slowly deflate as it kept going. And then there was another slide. There's another slide. And everyone's checking their watch. So that's probably like, and that's something easily fixed, right? Like we can prepare for that. We can practice that, and we can like fix that before it becomes a problem. The actual antidote that immediately jumped in my head was bad behavior on the part of the faculty. So I don't know when the last time people went on these, like as a candidate was, but when we tell you like, oh, you're trying to find good fit, right? It's the people in the room with you. It's how they treat you and how they react. I saw a job talk once as a graduate student. I was a wee baby master's student at the time, going to job talks just to see what interesting research was going on. And it was a lovely job talk. The presentation was really polished, poised. It was very clear this candidate had like talked about this topic and they were an expert. And then one of the professors, an old white man, in his defense, he was Australian. That's what he used. That's what he said was his defense. He just yelled the word BS, but he actually said the whole word in the middle of a presentation. And I was just floored. There were a few gasps, but a couple of faculty were very complicit in this poor behavior. So one, as a candidate, that should tell you if you want to work there or not. And you can find that through your job talks or the questions they ask you. But also, she handled it with grace and poise, and she said, I respectfully disagreed, and went on to defend her position. So in that way, I think that she handled herself like the presenter. All of you will handle yourself beautifully and gracefully when you get out there. But just know that these kind of horror stories also exist. And it's how you react, how you engage in that situation, like staying true to yourself. So those are my two.
Awesome, thank you so much. Dr. Rennels?
All right, well, I'll start with something that I think is really good to do. I really like when people begin their job talk with a personal story about what got them interested in the topic. It really helps draw in the audience, and it humanizes you. And then you can get more into like, you know, your broad interests and the specific details and all that. But that's a really great way to kind of let people know who you are and why you're doing this research and why it's important. Something you should not do is write everything you're saying to the audience on your slides. We had a job candidate in our department who had PowerPoint slides that were just text of what they were saying. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And the person was turning and reading just off the slides like that. So you can see it's not very engaging if I'm not looking at you because I'm looking over here, right? So that is something you do not want to do. You can make sure you have your own notes, make them minimal, but not shared with the audience. So those are my two stories.
Great, thank you so much. And we will be, because this is a series, it will be extending into spring semester. We've already had additional requests from students for more content. And so one of the students at the last panel, which was about preparing your materials when you start to apply, asked for a workshop, or essentially a working group, just to work on the PowerPoint presentations. And so I think that we will be able to do that in the spring. I haven't told my team that yet, and they're responding very wonderfully in the back as I just dropped that. But I think that that's excellent. All of this, the preparation, more preparation is better. And so I think that that's one of the take homes here. So thanks so much to the three of you. Well, I'm gonna start us off with one question, and we are going to keep an eye on the chat, and Alyssa will let me know when questions arise. So please, those of you online, feel free to ask questions and put them in the chat at any point, and we will respond. The first question that I think is a good one by way of entering into this conversation is, how do job talks differ for different types of institutions? So research universities, community colleges, liberal arts colleges. We have a great example here of the process. We have some materials that were brought by one of our panelists. But how would you go about understanding what the expectation is for the job talk portion at different types of universities? So that's the first question that we will approach. And I will, perhaps what we can do is I'll hand it over to Dr. Wing first to talk about some resources that she brought that are kind of overarching, but also approach that, and then we'll have each panelist respond.
So when I was on the job market, I found that there were a couple of books that were very useful. The first one is called Making the Right Moves, a practical guide to scientific management for postdocs and new faculty. So both of these are going to be geared towards scientists, but I think there are some important lessons in them. And then this other book here is called Academic Scientists at Work. And in these books, I've reread the section about how to give a good job talk, which is covered by both of these books this morning. But, you know, flipping through it, I can see how to hire staff, how to negotiate a salary, how to set up your office, how to write your first grant. These books have a wealth of information. Now, I understand these days that all this information is going to be on the web and you can shop around, but sometimes rather than doing that, it's just good to go to the shelf, pull off one resource and flip to the right page and know that you've got it there. That gives me a lot of comfort to have it on my shelf. And so if you feel the same way, perhaps these books will be of interest to you. Now, getting back to the question on the table, how do we know about the different institutes and how do you prepare for different institutes? I think a lot of that comes from the job advertisement. And then doing the research about the institute prior to the interview so that you understand whether they are looking for someone who's going to, for instance, have a research program, whether they're looking for somebody who's going to be heavily involved in teaching and lecturing, what class sizes are normal for that particular institute, and working all of those things out ahead of time is really critical in terms of getting you to prepare your materials, because you want to show that you fit that particular institute. And so you do that in different ways, and I'm sure we'll expand upon that. But if it's an R1 institution where research is heavy, you might get asked to give a prediction about your research funding in the future. Whereas if you're going for a smaller liberal arts college, you might be asked more about the sort of classworks and new frameworks that will allow students to be more involved in the educational process. And so I think most of that comes from the job advert, trying to work out what places you're applying to and the information that's in the advertisement.
Absolutely, I would agree with all of that. I'd go even a step back. How do we even identify where these institutions go? I always use Carnegie ranking, and that will tell you whether it's an R1, an R2, an R3, whether it's a SLAT, whether it's an M1, 2, or 3, and that will give you a sense of, like, you know, where do I start? R1s, any of the Rs are always looking for some sort of research, so that would absolutely be first and foremost. If they're an M, that means they're a master's granting institution, and it means that you should really focus on what it means to be a mentor to master's students and how you interact with undergraduates, right? And your talk needs to speak to those populations. But I always do the really deep dive, like I'm almost stalking these people. If it's a job I really, really want, right? I want to know what centers are on their campus that they would interact in that I can drop during, like, I can work with this center that you have on your campus. I see that they do good work in X. And that's always one of those like, oh, look at this person who's done their research. It feels real creepy at the time, but I go like 5 years deep into everyone's publications and I cite, like if it's relevant, I make sure I cite the relevant people on my slide. So they know I am familiar with them. This is part of like that like very subtle, yeah, I belong with you, I cite you, obviously I would be a good colleague. And I think making sure that you are situated as a colleague, you're not a grad student anymore, right? Like imagine your best self 5 years from now. That is the person you are pretending to be in this talk. Okay, so you stop talking about your dissertation, you start talking just about your research, right? Like you just reframe this work to present it better in these like spaces for these audiences and make sure it's super tailored to them. Okay, that's what I got.
Jen?
I can add a little bit. So I would say if you're applying to a research university, you're pretty much going to be doing a job talk that's based on your research. So you want to tell folks what you've done, where you're going next, you know, how you got to ask that question in the first place. And I think as already mentioned by other panelists, that you will want to focus on perhaps potential funding opportunities for the work that you're doing. So to indicate that you've looked into that and how you could support your research. And in some cases, you might also, if you do things like community partnerships, you might, so it was mentioned about centers on campus, but then there's also research that's conducted a lot of times with individuals in the community, and you may have found places where you could do research with those community members and mention that as well in your research talk. And I know if you're applying though for a position that's more focused on teaching, you might be ready to discuss your teaching philosophy. So this is typically what we ask individuals who are we're hiring for full teaching positions. And so they come in and they teach, they tell us about their teaching philosophy, their approaches to teaching, and the different methods they use in the classroom. And then they actually then portray an example of their teaching style. So as if they were giving you a lecture there. And so those are some differences then in how you would prepare for different types of talks, depending on what the focus is and the position that you're applying for.
Great, thank you.
Can I add
Go ahead.
one
Yeah,
thing?
sure.
I like both of you are right. Funding are so important. So when you think of the hard sciences, it's NIH, NSF is your gold star, their local and state level fundings. So let's say you're going to apply for a job in Washington. You would look at like what state level funding is in your area for your field. But that's the hard sciences. In the social sciences, we are Spencer, or like I'm in science education, so I also have a couple of NSF grants. Spencer is a big one. And then if you have private, if you're thinking about if you're thinking about humanities, sometimes they're foundation funded. So the Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I think it's just the Gates now. All of these will be things that you as grad students should look into to just include that you are familiar with in your job talk. So like these are the gold things that you want to try to go for when you're an assistant professor. Does that make sense? So I just want to give you like real tangible places you can start digging around it.
Just to add one more thing, actually thinking about a state school and thinking about the geographical location that you're going to be in. This relates to what Jen was saying about community. Geographical location can really sort of add on as well, because you know, here we are in a desert. There are sets of problems that this region face, right? And so plugging into that and explaining how your research fits into the geographical issues that are being faced also demonstrates fit. And so I think that's something to think about as well. Why would you be a good fit for Nevada? Why would you be a good fit for, you know, somewhere on the banks of the Mississippi? Perhaps you work with water purity or something like that. You know, there's all sorts of different ways that you can see your research fitting into geographical locations.
Excellent. And I'll add just a few points on that. I think the biggest take-home message here is understand the institution where you are applying and read the job advertisement, read the job call very carefully, because they're going to tell you precisely what they want. And so be aware of that. I told this anecdote last time, I will tell it again because I think it's relevant. I have a colleague who 1 year applied for 28 jobs and the next year applied for 16 jobs and was able to get a job in that second year. I'm not suggesting that you're going to apply for 28 jobs. That's also very hard on your letter writers, which we're going to talk about that down the line in the series. But it can often be, there's a division on this, but it can often be better to apply for positions that might be a stretch. You may have to really demonstrate or think carefully about how you would be a good fit. But you will be a good fit if you are applying for a position in which you actually are a good fit, where your research aligns with what the job call is asking for. And so there are different opinions on this, but particularly if you are really trying to put your best foot forward and you are demonstrating how your research articulates with that program, with that institution, with that population, with those centers, with that community outreach, then knowing how your research actually does articulate is a really good place to start. So be thinking about that also.
And we do have a question in the chat.
Great, thanks, Lisa.
So Evelyn asked, would you offer any different advice for adjunct faculty?
Are they currently an adjunct faculty, or are they looking for adjunct jobs? Very different.
Yeah.
I think they'd probably currently be an adjunct.
Can you hear that, Evelyn? Did you hear that question? Is this for going on the job market as an adjunct, or as an adjunct trying to move into a permanent position?
Adjunct, have been adjunct at the community college level and looking for adjunct at the university level.
Got it. Okay, so that is a totally, well, it's not a totally different process, but it is a somewhat different process. Does anyone on our panel want to take that?
I think you still have to do some thinking about what makes you eligible and suitable to apply for the position at the university if you're transitioning from a community college. And so I think you still got to do your homework in terms of why you fit, and then also thinking about the people that are currently at the university. Maybe you've got established relationships, working relationships with them, and fostering all of that in your letter or bringing that out in the letter is going to be very important as you apply for that adjunct status at the university.
And I will follow that up. I would be remiss as the Dean of the Graduate College if I didn't also encourage you to indicate whether or not you'd be interested in sitting on committees of graduate students. Because if you have relevant expertise that you can bring to bear in terms of mentoring graduate students, whether that be master's or doctoral students, particularly with your level of expertise or your existing connections, if you can bring that as an asset to the department, you're often far more likely to get that adjunct status. It tends to be highly variable whether adjunct faculty are essentially in name only or whether they actually teach regularly. Sometimes they're adjunct just as research, sometimes they're adjunct just as teaching, sometimes they hold adjunct status just to sit on committees. So it really is variable depending on the discipline and the institution. Here at UNLV, it's about a 12 to 18 month process to get approved. From the point at which an individual department will approve that adjunct status, it can be a year or better before it actually works its way all the way up through senior administration, and then you're put on the website and can actually get all of the benefits that you would get as being adjunct. It also comes with not only responsibilities in some instances, but also some perks. So many folks really want to be adjunct because they then have access to libraries. They have access to all of our resources in the beautiful library in which we sit, and also the virtual resources that are associated with our library, and a UNLV email address. And these are things that a lot of adjunct faculty are actually seeking in addition to the professional connection and the CV line for themselves also. So just be thinking about how that landscape is different institutionally and in the departments. Jennifer, Tina, do either one of you want to add anything?
Well, with that said, I just wanted to say, because you've already been an adjunct professor at a community college, you've definitely gained a lot of skills that can be transferred to a university, and definitely tout those experiences and those skills that you've gotten from teaching there, that they are quite transferable to a university setting.
Can I ask a very silly question then? Is there a difference, at least here at UNLV, between adjunct and part-time?
Yes, there is a difference, yeah. So PTI part-time instructors can sometimes also be adjunct, but you can hire a PTI or a part-time instructor as a one-off to teach a class. An adjunct is an actual affiliation status that actually routes through faculty affairs. It routes all the way through the provost's office. PTI does not.
So let's be clear, I've been on higher ed jobs with a bunch of my grad students recently. And there are calls for PTIs versus adjuncts versus faculty and residents versus professors of practice in other institutions. It's really important that, again, what Alyssa said, you read that job call really carefully, ideally with your advisor. I sit down and I read job calls with my grad students all the time.
You can also email the Grad Academy, or you can email me directly, because not everyone has advisors who
Are willing.
have the time or inclination to do that. Obviously, we wouldn't have selected these fine folks here if we thought that that were the case with this crew. But I know that some of you have expressed concerns that your advisors are very, very busy and that they don't have the time to help prepare you to be competitive on the job market, which was part of the impetus for this series. So you can always reach out to the grad college, and we are always here to help. We can also point you in the direction of other resources. And if you're not sure what the job is, like if you don't know what faculty and residence means, or professor of practice means, Google is your best friend, because you will also be able to figure that out. Another tip is to go to that institution and do a keyword search for whatever that position title is. And that will take you to a profile, hopefully, of other individuals who have been hired in that same capacity, which is another way to kind of give you a heads up as to what you might be applying for. Any other questions right now, Alyssa?
Not at the moment.
Okay, so I will, wow, time is marching on here. I will move on to another question. I'm gonna slightly tweak one of these. I think that it would be really useful for our students who are getting ready to enter the market to hear from the three of our panelists. What are some tips for the best way to structure a job talk? So we heard a great piece of advice, well, we've heard several great pieces of advice, particularly the one at the top of the panel, top of the meeting, which was kind of introduce yourself in a memorable way with a meaningful way to kind of catch your audience. But from that point forward, what are some of the best tips, some of the hot takes for how to best structure your actual PowerPoint presentation? So Jen, why don't we start with you, Dr. Rennels?
So some suggestions are, you can approach it by thinking about what your goal is. You know, by the end of this talk, I want my audience to understand my research and hire me, right? Want to hire me, but have a goal and convert that goal to a take-home message that gets delivered throughout the talk. And a successful job talk is really one where the speaker appears confident, they engage with the audience, they take pauses for the audience to digest the information, and you're attentive to whether people seem to be understanding the material or looking confused. So that's why it's good for you to take breaks and look out at your audience, because sometimes if it looks like they're confused, you might say, maybe you want to add on to that. You also might want to engage with the audience to make it interactive. I know we've had candidates for our jobs come in and ask questions with the audience, or, or ask them things, that were involved in their research studies, just to make it more engaging and involved. And then the other thing is make your slides interesting. You want to have more images than text. And there's something called a 10-20-20 rule, which means 10 slides for a 20-minute talk. So you might want 22 slides for a 45-minute talk, kind of thing, but you don't want to have so many slides. And then the 30 refers to, I'm sorry, it was a 10-20-30 rule. The 30 refers to font size, and having a larger font size actually stops you from putting too much information, you know, on any one slide, thus avoiding any death by PowerPoint, right? Just sometimes you get these slides and there's so much text on them and it's overwhelming. So rely more on images, lesser text, and try and keep it that way. So it's easier for your audience to take in what's on the slides and they can focus more on what you're saying than reading all this text.
Great, thank you. I would just follow that up before I pass it on to my panelists. I have also often, one of the things that's really hard for me when I'm seeing a job talk is when you have data visualization. So for those of us who work with a lot of data, a lot of big data, particularly for those in STEM, you're going to have your data projected. And one of the things that's often really hard is to have those data projected and then a whole bunch of text with it. That's basically to the same point about maybe your image is just the graph or is just whatever your cluster analysis, whatever it is, you know, maybe that would be kind of just an add-on for some STEM heavy stuff there. So I will turn to Dr. Wayne for any points on.
Yeah, so I've got some, again, I'm pulling information from here, so I think that's, so there is a skeleton that you want to come up with in terms of organization. Clearly, you want to tell them the objectives. What are your objectives of the talk? The significance of the problem that you're addressing is a key element as well. And then you might start to dig into your experiments or your research that you've done that sort of address both the objectives and the significance. And make sure that when you're doing this, you're doing it in a way that allows the audience to go along with you. This is not a written paper, right, where they can, you know, look at your data sets for 20 minutes over a coffee and turn it over and think about it. What you've got to do is deliver the message in a very short and concise way. And the best way to do that is tell them what you're going to tell them, show them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you've just shown them. Yes, it sounds very, very repetitive, doesn't it? But guess what? That's how it lands. That's how it resonates with people 3 times and they get the message. So before you show them, and then afterwards. That's a really good way of making sure that the key points that you're trying to deliver are coming across. And of course, you're going to do this with every major data set that you have, every piece of research that you're doing. You've got to show that your science is exciting. Make sure that when you're delivering it, that your excitement about your research is evident. I think that's a really important thing to come up with. And then at the end, you've got to bring it all together, everything that you've shown them, and bring it together and put it back in the big picture, right? Show them how all of those detailed experiments or the detailed research really address the fundamental problem that you set up. This circularity in a job talk, where you start off with a big picture and you dig into it and then you come all the way back to that big picture at the end, that's an elegant talk. When you see that, my hair stands on end when I see that. And also, I always love it when you're in a science talk and people are bringing in a little bit of artistic flair. I love that as well. It just, to me, it just shows you that you're dealing with a true academic that really just loves information and research. So they're no more thoughts.
No, I love it. I was hoping that you'd say, bring us something to touch. Paleontology, like bring a fossil. No. I'm gonna actually go in a slightly different direction. I'm gonna go back to that first question. It's like, where are you applying? I always think any good research talk, there are a few exceptions, always address research, teaching, and service, and end with trajectory. So your research will take the bulk of the time, like most of the time, but you want to tack in, ideally, how this research that you're doing helps students, How does it help mentoring students? How does it help like you to work with grad students? How does it help you work with undergrads? How do you bring your research and your interest and your passion into the things that you are also going to teach for them? If that makes sense. Even if you're going to teach Bio 101 or large lecture writing, right? How does your research feed into making your teaching better? And then again, that like if you're going for an R1, you're talking like 90% of your presentation research, 5% of your like presentation will be on the teaching bit. And then service. Like how does what you do in your research, again, the thing that you've dedicated your life to, also make you a better community member? How does it get you out into making a name for your university? So here, I tout the UNLV banner when I go out to do my community things, right? I ask for funds for my dean to help fund teachers to do X, Y, or Z. And that's what they're looking for, someone who's engaged on all three of those scales. And it always ends with trajectory. And that trajectory is how I imagine, like, you put this back into the big picture. What will you do to continue this, to be better, be greater? What are your dreams and hopes? Because I've sat through quite a few of these like presentations, whether I'm on the committee or not. I show up to like see who we're gonna hire. And I want someone who's like at least interested in the work that they do. And I know it's scary. I know job talks can be scary, but you gotta bring your personality in. You have to show them that you're a reasonable human being and that PhD didn't crush your spirit and that you're ready to show up for this university. So that's how, like, I do research, a little bit of teaching, and a little bit of service. If you're at M, you're going for one of those teaching universities, I'd switch that. I'd go 90% teaching philosophy, like, and each one of these pieces needs a real example. Not just like, oh, this is my data, like, it's, yeah, bring your data set, but like, here's a publication that I did, or here's a picture of me in the field, or here is an example of like me running a writing workshop. Your teaching should have an example. What's an example of you educating someone on your information? What's an example of you bringing your research out into the community?
Great, thank you. And I would follow up by saying there are also subtle ways to do this. One of the things that I have my students do when they're preparing talks is to, as they're talking about a large concept and how their work fits into it, I often have them sneak in, as I always tell my students, blank. And then what you're doing is you're not taking a slide away from your research, but you are demonstrating how you are integrating your teaching into your research. So there's also some really, there's some subtle ways that you can do that too if it tends to be a super research heavy institution, but you still want to project that you're a good community member and that you will fit in with that group. Just a couple of big ones, which has already been mentioned, but I want to hit it home again. Pay attention to the amount of time that you have been allocated for that talk and stay within that time frame. So make sure, to the excellent point about the ratio, I have always thought that 50%, so again, so that same rule that was just mentioned, if you have 40 minutes, maybe don't have more than 20 slides, right? That was a really good, those are good numbers to keep in mind, because you want to make sure that you're not rushing and you're not, that your audience is really captivated by what you're trying to tell them. And I love this idea of bringing it back. I always tell my students the why do we care portion of the talk. So you start with why we care, and then you drill down to your excellent, that was beautiful, that skeleton I think is just awesome. And then you come back with why do we care, to remind them. So I think that was just, that skeleton was really outstanding. So I think that was great. Any questions on that?
We have a couple questions in the chat here. So I'll start with this one from Deanna. What are some examples of service that doctoral students may reflect on during the job talk and or place on a CV?
You should definitely have a service area in your CV if you don't have one. Like just literally just labeled service. Things like volunteering. And service can be broken, like there should be a subsection under service of your own personal growth and development, because that also makes your community better. Like if you attend these things, like personal professional development. I attended these workshops put on by the Rebel Academy. But service for grad students, like I know that I served on a few committees as a graduate student. you can actually ask, like, oh, you're doing a search committee. Can I be a graduate student rep for that search committee? It helps you because you get the insider know-how, and then you get another line on your CV. Sending out a newsletter, like, or running a forum, or those things are what happens in my college.
Yeah, our department has an outreach undergraduate mentoring program where we pair undergraduate students with graduate students. So that's an excellent thing that someone can tout when they're going on the job market. Like, I already have mentoring experience by mentoring undergraduates. And often these are students who are first-gen students, students of color. And so this is a program to then get them on the pathway of research and having a mentor to guide them. And so that's another thing that can be put on there. You can volunteer to help with various events and talk about how that might be related to your research. So there's different ways you can convey the types of service that you've done and do service that really interests you and sometimes aligns with your research. I know a lot of the students in the outreach the graduate students in our outreach undergraduate mentoring program are very to diversity and we
might have lost Dr. Rennels. Bad internet connection, I think.
So I'll step in here and try and help. But I also think any examples of leadership that you've got when you've led something or done something would also fit in under the service heading. That might be in a college club, association, like here on campus that you've been involved in. It could be, you know, it's always, at least for the scientists that I mentor, I encourage them to get involved in national societies. So the American Society for Microbiology, to get some sort of national body that you're working with, or perhaps you go to their meetings as well. So it sort of plugs you into not just your local community, but the national community as well. And those are other service examples that I would add under that heading on the CV, and that you could showcase on a slide where you have perhaps just the word service at the top and a variety of different images, and that you could just use to talk about what you've done and some of those experiences.
Outstanding, outstanding. I would just follow up by highlighting a few opportunities we have at the Graduate College through the Grad Academy for students who might not have these opportunities in their home units. So the undergrad mentoring example, I think, is an outstanding one because it really demonstrates a lot to a search committee. And if you are interested in engaging in that, we have something called GRA, we call it affectionately, Grad Rebel Advantage, which pairs a graduate student with a pod, a cohort of undergrad students in your discipline, in your area, to do essentially to work through research projects and to go through mentorship training. And honestly, it will make you a better mentee as well as a better mentor when you work through those types of programming. So we have the Grad Rebel Advantage available for all 5,000 grad professional students here. So please take advantage of that if you're interested in doing service in that way. We also have additional service opportunities that are available through the Graduate College, through the Grad Academy, but also through student services. So student organizations, we have graduate registered student organizations here at UNLV. We have GRSOs, and that is a great way to do service because there are events. Not only does it help in terms of persistence and social networking to kind of keep you, that social networking component is really a very important part of vitality and health as a graduate student when you're in your program. But also these cultural affinity groups are really great for community engagement. And so that can also fall under service. And last but not least, just to follow up on something that was just mentioned about national societies, there are often student roles for things like social media content. Often you will find that there are organizations, there are societies that really need help with tweets or really need help with their Insta account. And grad students are better positioned, I dare say, than many faculty to do that in a way. We even have some who are now moving to TikTok channels. So I will leave all of that to the GAs when we go that direction. But that just be looking for those opportunities, because that is all service, that is all networking, and that is all going to bolster your CV with real things that are meaningful, real arrows in your quiver, as opposed to just CV padding.
I will say this, I normally ask, but I never demand, I ask my grad students to keep their service limited to like one thing a semester that they're like dedicated, and it can be multiple semesters, right? Like they're dedicated to being a mentor to these undergraduates, like, but that's what they're doing. And that's all we really need, right? Like it's really easy to get involved and it's wonderful. If it's networking, that's a whole different ballgame. Network your selves as much as you can. But if it's like pure service, just one a semester, maybe.
Absolutely.
It's up between you and your advisor.
Absolutely. And also you have many years to do this. And so
Yes.
It also depends on where you are in your career when you have the bandwidth to do it.
Oh yeah.
So when you're writing your dissertation, probably not the best time for you to be trying to mentor an undergrad on a research project.
But your first
right?
year, as much as
So just be thinking about this, and of course, open dialogue with your advisor or your graduate coordinator is a really great place to start in terms of thinking about this also. Where does it make sense for you to fit it into your own trajectory? Oh yes, question, absolutely.
Really quick.
No, please, by all means.
After the job talk, like I've already worked in the tech industry, and going for an interview, there's usually a follow-up. So academia is different. So after the job talk, what happens?
question and answer time.
Yeah.
People are just gonna ask you a million questions or nothing, and that means that you did a good job, and everyone's very happy with what you did.
They will. I'm sure they will, yeah. Or they're not happy. I expect a lot of questions. And that's a great way for us to, I think that's a great way for us to end, is to talk about this particular aspect. So this, remember, is only one small component of the interview process. So the job talk will then be followed by a question and answer period most typically. Okay, so we also have examples of how full your day will be, and we're gonna be doing that in spring semester. We're gonna actually walk through. So we may have to bring Tina back and walk you through. It's usually 2 to 3 full days, and you're interviewing. Every single thing that you do, you are interviewing. Every meal you eat, every walk you take from point A to point B, every student you chat with, all of that is your interview. But for this particular thing that we're talking about today, in terms of the job talk and the question and answer period, what I will ask our panelists is some take-home advice on how to prepare. And it's also a lot of anxiety. It doesn't matter how many times you prepare your job talk, a lot of the anxiety comes out in the question and answer period. And so how do you kind of address some of that anxiety and how to best prepare, given that you don't know what types of questions are going to be thrown at you? How can candidates prepare for that? So that's the question we'll pose to our panelists.
So I would say that there are 2 really stressful points just before you begin your talk and just as you end your talk, right? Because at the beginning of the talk, you've got to get it going, and you've got all those nerves. So remember to take deep breaths at the beginning, nice, slow things down, and also practicing those first 2 or 3 slides so that you've gotten down pat, that you can do them in your sleep, is going to help those nerves, because you'll go on autopilot and that will be fine, but it will get you going and you'll get over those nerves. So practicing is critically important, but more so at the beginning of your talk, because you're going to be super nervous. Then at the end of the talk, you get nervous because you don't know what's coming at you, right, in terms of the questions. And so, again, you've got to maintain your composure. And you've got to try and make sure that you're understanding the question accurately that's being asked of you. And so one thing that you can do is, so let me just restate that question, or let me just see if I understand the question correctly. You're asking me X, Y, and Z. By doing that, your brain can be thinking what the answer is going to be, and you're also parroting back to them to show that you're paying attention and that you can deliver the goods for that particular question. And if they don't, if you've not got it quite right, that's okay. You know, you're going to get corrected. And so I think that's a critically important skill in the question and answer session, making sure that you can do that. Also, don't waffle on and on and on and on and on and on and on like I'm doing right now. Keep it short and sweet if you can. Get to the point as quickly as you can. Nobody can do that to start with very easily. That's also a skill that's going to take practice, right? Or that should be practiced. Hopefully during the course of your graduate school education, you're going to be doing this and honing these skills. So, but you're not learning it for the job talk. Hopefully you've got some mastery in this process before you're in that position.
I also want to add, you might want to set some ground rules at the beginning of your talk.
Oh,
Just say things like, can you hear me?
yes. No, I'm excited by that.
Okay, good. Okay.
Oh, I thought that was a ground rule.
So you can say things like, if you need any clarification during my talk, I'm happy to answer those during the talk. Or you could say, if you don't mind waiting till the end of the talk for questions, you know, unless you need clarification, let's do that. So set the ground rules too, so you have a little bit being in charge of questions. And sometimes you get really off the wall questions. I've had that before. And so you have the right to say, I think we're getting a little bit off topic here, so let's move on, and I can talk with you about that later. So you also don't get stuck in something that's really not necessary or, you know, linked to what you're trying to convey. And sometimes you don't know the answer, and that's okay. You don't have to know everything, and it's better to be honest than to pretend you know something. And you could say, well, you know, it might be X, but I really don't know, you know, but you can come up with something. You can discuss maybe how that question could be investigated if you don't know the answer, or you can even ask your audience, does anyone have some input or thoughts on this, and get them involved. And so you want to be genuine, right? You don't want to make up something. And so it's okay to not know an answer and to be honest about that.
Oh, yeah, I really like both of these statements. I'm going to need everyone in this room and anyone watching this video to go to a job talk being held at UNLV.
Right. Yeah.
Like, they're announced, and if they aren't announced, go talk to your department AA and ask, hey, do we have any candidates coming? And just like around the college, it doesn't even have to be your discipline, just seeing one.
That's right.
Will give you so much perspective of how this is run. And I promise, especially if it's in your department, as soon as they leave the room, the professors around there are going to start talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I promise. Like, or if you can convince your advisor to go to one with you, they will debrief it and they will unpack it with you about like, what did you love, what did you hate? Because nothing will educate you more than seeing one live in action. Okay. I'm just going to echo that. Handle every moment with polish. The tech issues that you might have in the beginning, at the end, if someone again asks something outside of your scope, I'm like, oh, what a great question. I think that's a little outside of my current scope of research. Maybe we can talk about that later. Immediately move on. Right? Does that make sense? Like, you don't have, like, that is the academic zhuzhing way. It's like, I have no idea. Like, I'll Google this. Right? There's a really, like, we can get you 90% of the way. And then it's these weird, like, polished things that will get you the extra 10% that'll make it more like, oh yeah, let's get that kid. Yeah, right? 1, 2, yeah, let's make that offer. So it's those things that you're just gonna have to be real diligent about. You can do it. It's just takes the work. It's like having another job on top.
That's right. And we're going to go through more of these intricacies next semester when we get to talking about what the days-long interview looks like, and how to approach things like meals and etiquette. We're actually going to be going through all of those aspects in the spring as well. So we are there. We are at our hour. I would really like to,
Two things.
two things, never mind, we are not there yet.
Practice and use a spell checker.
Yeah, yes,
Spell check.
yes, please use the spell check. I know that we tend to look past that squiggly line now. Somehow we're allergic or immune to it or something, and so we don't see that it actually is doing its job. It's underlining a word that is spelled incorrectly or being used improperly. So please pay attention to that and do the spell check, absolutely. If you have any questions, please direct them to the Grad Academy and we will make sure that we have some responses sent back to you if you weren't able to ask your question today. Please join me in thanking our three panelists for sharing their time and their insight and their advice with us today. We are grateful. Rest of your day, and we will see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone.